Hello, Lauryn Welch. Welcome to our stream. I'm here today with Professor Lieu and a guest artist today, Chummeng Soun. And today we are going over Chummeng's MFA portfolio. But first, if your studio habits need a kick in the butt, Art Prof has everything you need: tutorials, critiques, and professional development. So, Clara, we've got a bit of a bio here with Chummeng first. Can you kick us off?
Well, Chummeng, right now you are a senior at UMass Lowell, a art and design major, but that's just half of it. You also have a minor in architectural studies, Asian studies, and a concentration in graphic design. And we understand from speaking to you that you have interest in maybe doing an MFA, perhaps in sculpture, but clearly you are a multifaceted artist. And I'm curious why you chose so many topics. There's so much pressure on people to specialize now. Why do you have all the minors? I think it's great. I just want to know.
Yeah, so I didn't know what art and design is. And that's the honest truth until 2 years ago. I began as a traditional Cambodian dancer, wasn't considered an art form or wasn't introduced as art. So I didn't know what to study in college and went for an Asian study, and now I'm here.
That's great. And so why are you thinking about an MFA program? What is your reasoning for maybe wanting to pursue that degree?
Yeah, so my work currently is focusing on the here and now, and the conversation I'm most likely to have with myself in the here and now is the diasporic imagination. And I want to diversify that. I want to expand my personal practice, the trajectory of my personal practice, and to have that conversation, to see and to develop and to continue on creating the unforeseen work that I am still curious about.
Well, we're going to go through all the pieces individually, but you guys will see that Chummeng has drawings, installations, projections, photos, site-specific artwork. It's incredibly diverse in terms of the different media. So, Lauryn, what's your first take on all of Chummeng's work in general?
It was interesting that you said everything was so diverse, Clara, because when I first looked at this portfolio, I wasn't thinking that at all, or I was more thinking about how unified everything looked. And then the different mediums came out afterwards. I was thinking, wow, all of these are following a really similar trajectory or line of thought in this way that you can see an idea develop from a small seed, maybe a drawing or a plan, into a larger thing, into multiple lenses, multiple spaces, literal spaces. And so I think that was really captivating for me. What about you? What do you think about this diversity of medium and diversity of ideas?
Well, I think there's definitely a cohesive aesthetic. If I were to describe that, I can definitely see where the architectural studies comes into play. You have a lot of pieces that are quite meticulous in terms of construction. A lot of the geometry is very specific and very well held together. But you also have pieces that I think are very haunting, like the photograph with the figure in the upper right-hand corner. To me, feels more like a painting than like a photo. But then also you have that site-specific piece in the lower left with the drapery that's flowing. And so there is a somewhat minimalistic quality to your work. You don't have a huge amount of color, and when you do have color, it's usually a tint of a color. I mean, probably the photo is the most colorful out of everything. So I would agree with Lauryn that despite the range of different media that you're working in, the aesthetic definitely carries across very consistently. So how about this piece? Chummeng, can you tell us about this piece? Is this a sketch? Is this a finished piece? Where does this fit in your portfolio right now?
So this is actually one of an exploration, a still life. In this piece, I want to describe the line weight, the delicacy of the object, and then expanding that trajectory to how this can actually can be reinterpreted into actual space. Although this is just a drawing, it's still in the first stage.
So is this a plan for a future project? This is not just drawing and that's it. It's got other things you want to do with it eventually?
Yeah, so currently this is just a drawing. I haven't had a chance to delve deep into it yet, but I did have this imagination that it will become some sort of installation.
What's your take, Lauryn?
Well, when I first look at this, I am thinking of the photographer Irving Penn and his drawings that he used to plan things out to understand what the weight and relationship between objects is. And I see this relational quality between all of the objects, how they inform each other, and the different gravities, how the different gravities have counterpoints between objects. Everything couldn't really exist without the other thing there. So if it was any individual object, I wouldn't be so much interested in it. But because you have them all lined up in this way that has this rhythmic quality to it, it is engaging both in the darks and in the super lights. You get very, very, very light in some of those areas. But when you say that it's going to be an installation, this is where I get lost a little bit. I'm not sure how this translates material-wise or concept-wise into space. So I would love to see the next step of that.
I mean, one thing that occurs to me when I look at this drawing in relation to everything else is it seems that you should think a lot about transparency and opacity if something is translucent, because especially with materials, the materials that you choose, especially for 3D work, it makes a really big difference. So you might start thinking a lot about surface. For example, is this a material that has a sheen to it? Does it have a gloss to it? Is it matte? Is it opaque? Is it something that's frosted? I think if you start really thinking about that and maybe even doing a collage, like you could get translucent mylar and maybe cut it and put it on black paper. Maybe incorporating collage with the drawing might be a good sketching process for you.
I was thinking of Duralar, Mylar as well, especially given that a lot of your work that we'll go through later has an architectural kind of feel to it. And I know in showing either layers of a building or a sculpture or depth of a space that is used very often to convey that. So if you're not using it already, it's a great material.
We have a comment from Neil who says the horizontal quality of this piece is so calming, not boring. I especially love the placement of the two solid black shapes. Those shapes are important because if you take away those two black shapes, all of a sudden, nothing looks as light and airy. Those black shapes create the context for those objects to exist within, which is great. So Chummeng, where does this fit into your work?
Yeah, so this is important because my work ranged from small scale, human scale, to medium scale. Small scale to meaning the hand, medium scale meaning the human, to large scale architect. This is an example of that, starting from the drawing. Taking that drawing of two places, Cambodia, where I was born, to America, where I was displaced, Lowell, Massachusetts. And then meshing those two planes from purely my imagination, I began this series of drawing that soon would become an installation space, a part of an installation space, actually.
So are you taking, when you're talking about these spaces that you're in, both in Cambodia and in Lowell, Massachusetts, what spaces are you pulling from? Are they geometric, linear type spaces in the sense of maps, topography? Are they imagined social cultural spaces? or are they physical landscape type spaces? Which are you working from?
They are the reimagination of my living space. So my house in Cambodia reimagined to my houses here in America, reimagined purely from my imagination in my head, how I remember. So notating that.
Okay. I think it would be I would love to see maybe some close-ups on those papers. I know that there are so many of them, and I know that this is like a very detailed layered process. So I would just think about ways that you could show multiple things at once and be able to hold that detail, maybe even going into a more video process to show this kind of layering, like 3D graphics.
Slapnir is saying, now this is interesting, a transformation from a design to play with a bit of 3D. I think that for me, the works that really resonate are the ones that are not all 2D and not all 3D, if that makes any sense. I really like this drawing a lot, actually. It's a tiny drawing. It's only 9 inches tall, but there's something that you're doing with scale and the cutout paper that's so minimal. And it does feel like a huge space to me, which is nuts considering how physically small the drawing really is. And so I feel like I'm more attracted to this one for that reason. It could also be that the shapes are so blunt and you have this architectural opening that doesn't really make a lot of sense. So I don't try to actually put this into real life. It becomes its own space. And I feel like you're not really talking about, oh, what did my house in Cambodia actually look like, but what did it feel like? At least that's my interpretation. Is that somewhat accurate?
Yeah, thinking about, again, back to Cambodia, after the war, after the American war legacy in Southeast Asia, what happened? There's a huge void, right? People are displaced. So I purely did this drawing thinking about what is that? What is it? Questioning that, and it almost become a memorial design.
Wow.
Are you interested in designing memorials someday?
Yes, that's actually where my focus, my focus is now. Yeah.
I'm interested in the different languages one can have for voids within your work, because you have a literal physical space in the center with the papering there, but then you also have this way where the structure of the drawing fades out, as if there is either a memory lapse or this lack of detail that correlates with memory in some way. And then also the way that these people, as Clara said, occupy the whole of the canvas, the whole of the frame, which shows this, they are also in a void within this space. So you're dealing with both physical voids and mental voids and historical voids as well, which I think is super interesting.
So Tainley says, the process piece reminds me so much of architecture school. At juries, you were encouraged to show your initial sketches and relate it to the finished project. So your architectural studies, did you have to go through a whole architecture boot camp, or was it individual classes? How did that factor into your practice?
So growing up, I was surrounded by the end product of Le Corbusier student Van. He's the Le Corbusier of Cambodia. Little did I ever know that he actually re-entered my life. And he is my biggest inspiration to first, I don't know what architect is. I don't even know where to begin until actually a couple years ago, meaning 2 years ago. And then, head on, I was accepted to design discovery at the GSD, and I practiced a little bit in architectural drawing, and that really pushed me to form and shape my practice in the here and now.
And yet we have this film piece. Well, it's not a film piece. It's a photograph that was shot on film, to be perfectly clear. This is so different than the other ones. I mean, if there's anyone that doesn't, quote, fit as far as the aesthetic goes, this is probably the most different out of all of them. So where does this one go as far as contextualizing itself in your work?
Again, the diasporic imagination not just exists in the architectural space, but also the environment in which he or she position himself or herself in, or themselves in. What does that feel like to be here? What does that feel like to be in the now? And this is a description of my here, of my now, when I was displaced or feel that sense of empathy for my parents, I guess. My mom, especially, and putting myself in her shoe.
Yeah, I think that this is, it's hard. In most other portfolios, I would say something that is so different in medium and depiction would take us out of the portfolio, but I don't necessarily feel that with this, because the emotional tenor and this through line with this here and now that you're talking about, that we have seen in the drawings, but we will also see in the installations, kind of meets a middle point here that I think makes sense. But Clara, I would love to hear your opinion of this, because you're coming from a different MFA teaching thing than I am.
I mean, here's what I think is interesting is I do feel when I look at this photo, I have to look at in the context of the other work. In other words, it's hard for me to just say, okay, just look at this one photo, because I'm thinking about what you talked about earlier about architectural spaces and the void. And to me, this one has a beautiful atmosphere to it. It's haunting, it's mysterious. And it's interesting because I don't totally know where it is. It could be in Cambodia. It could be in the US. It's not that obvious as far as the location. And I sort of like the ambiguity of that.
Yeah.
I wonder if this is a sketch for something else, that maybe photography becomes a sketching medium for you the way drawing was. Because I sort of look at this photo and think of it in the context of your practice as being a, quote, raw material, that you take this photo so you can manipulate it digitally, maybe you cut it up, maybe you do other things. So I feel that this is the beginning. I feel that there's a lot of potential. I mean, do you want to do more photography in the future, or?
No, I think you got it. This is actually the first piece that I put myself forward. I mean, kind of bare naked, literally. So this was the prelim of my here and now. This was everything. It allows me to expand the trajectory. And that's why I want to have this conversation here with you guys and the audience.
Neil is saying, oh my God, that's a beautiful subject. I find it very inspiring as a fellow Southeast Asian. And says, also interesting to me is the concept of the void after the US occupation. My common reaction to that subject is dirt and mess, completely the opposite of what's portrayed here. It's so interesting. I mean, depending on who you are and the generation you grow up in, it's like your perception of events is so vastly different that's going on. All right, now this next piece we have, this is an installation. And so we have several photos of it. And we actually have a process video, so you guys can see how Chummeng created this. So can you tell us about this piece, actually?
Yeah, so this piece actually began with a drawing that I actually didn't submit in, which I should have as a process. But following that drawing, I began looking at not just the whole, but what's happening in that whole as small to medium to large. And this is an accumulation of both object and assemblage of object, as well as thinking about that organization and assemblage, and then reinterpreting that into another piece, which I end up doing. I've reinterpreted this piece to another, basically sculpture. And then understanding the language that I'm using is important to me.
Yeah, I think that focus on the size of each module and its relationship to the body gives this sense of almost, the word is not placelessness, but maybe disorientation as far as what is the scale of the final piece. I mean, we can see here in the video, but in the other photo of it, it could be enormous. It could be hundreds of feet long. It could be super tiny. It could be a house that one could live in. And I think that this accommodation for all scales to the body creates these many imaginations, these many pathways that we can go with it. It almost, like, I almost don't want to see this in person, because then I would be limited down to one pathway, one viewpoint. I like that it can go in many different directions.
I mean, it's a really dynamic installation. There's no end of movements and shapes to be looking at. But I think the difference here is that I don't feel so much the themes you were referring to earlier about displacement. It feels more playful to me. And I wonder if it's because there are a lot of contemporary artists out there like Sarah Z who create these big, dizzying on-site installations. And I think sometimes it's really hard to compete with that because we have seen that so many places. I mean, I'll tell you, I really like this image as a 2D image. And again, this is where I say, maybe photography is your sketching tool and you make something from this. Because here's the thing. In this image, I look at it and I say, oh, it's an installation. But at least from my point of view, the lighting is really not helping you. It's making it hard to see the form. It sort of cuts up the shape. But when I look at this, I don't read it as a photo of an installation. I read it as a photo, if that makes any sense. So I'm a fan of photography having a bigger role in your process. Are you excited about that, or what do you think?
Yeah, I actually haven't had this conversation yet, so I'm really excited to be able to speak to you, because I knew what you said exactly. Sarah Z already done this. Many people already done this. So what's next, right? So this photography was actually the starting point, which I didn't realize until what we were discussing of what the final product was. Yeah.
Actually, speaking of that, Scott says, is the final work here the installation or the grayscale photo? So yeah, is it this photo, or are you thinking more about the installation?
Neither. I actually
Neither, okay.
Yeah. The final product pulled the language from the photo that helps me understand to another sculpture that I believe I did not submit.
You should have included it so we could see the whole trajectory.
It's so procedural. It's just, this is my struggle, actually. My work is such procedural. It's like process after process after process. What do I show in an MFA portfolio?
It's a curse and a blessing. I think it's wonderful that you are so engaged in your process. You love materials, you love photography, you're good at so many things. But then it's like, okay, at a certain point, we do have to make some decisions and start to resolve. But I think that given that you're still in school and you're not done with your senior year, it makes sense to be that way. It's just now, I think this critique, it's a good time to sort of step back and say, okay, what do I really want to follow through on? Because everything we've talked about today has potential. I think for you, it's just a matter of, well, where do I really want to take that? So we have this comment from Janelle, who says, the shadows really bring the piece together. I never thought shadows could have that impact. I think the shadows are almost more important than the cardboard pieces. I mean, in the photograph, you almost can't tell the difference between the two. So that's one of the reasons why I find this one so striking. And then it could be a color thing, just that it's black and white. It feels more stark and more empty, whereas maybe the brown just makes it a little bit too fun. I don't know. Okay, let's look at this projection. Can you explain to us how this works? I know it's frustrating to look at this in a slide, but we'll do the best we can.
Right. So this is actually a exploration, one of the many exploration to this final piece. And it's a performative piece where I actually talk about how I arrived in this place right there where you're at right now. And that performance described the relationship of those sticks that goes in the triangle falls, how I come to that conclusion. Right. Those triangles.
Oh, so the sticks fall apart?
Right.
Oh,
how did they fall apart?
I pushed them. So it was a performative piece. The relationship to my body, the relationship to the image projected, to the relationship between the image to that triangle piece, and me pushing it.
Oh.
Yeah.
And is the image behind, is that water that's flowing?
That's actually a piece of land. And the original idea was I wanted to own this piece of land just as is, and the school would have to preserve it. The school would loan this piece of land to me. But of course, that was all imagination, right? So to really push that idea out, I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to photograph it. I'm going to look into it. And then I did a bunch of drawings, a bunch of processes that led me into this triangle. There's almost not, it's not a void. It's just a structure that's unstable.
And how does the land that you wanted to own or get leased out, how does that then connect to your body, connecting to pushing the triangles over and the shape of the triangles themselves?
So this piece of land was actually an abandoned land that is diversified with wildflower. And much like Crystal and John Claude claiming to cover one of the Berlin building, I wanted to claim this piece of land to bring into focus the here and the now, and to be able to listen and be present in that specific location. And this piece of land, I'm telling you, it's like a mountain, a steep mountain. And that steep mountain isn't given enough attention at UMass Lowell. So I wanted to give that attention to that mountain.
I mean, I think this is a documentation issue that because we can't watch the performance, it's hard to evaluate it based on the photos that we have. So I don't know that my critique is going to be that accurate necessarily, but my first thought, I love the concept of the land because that goes with the themes of displacement in Cambodia and moving to the US. So that's great. I just wonder if maybe there's a better way in terms of materials for these cross pieces to be, because they just seem really heavy. And I feel like what I really like about projected artworks is the strange transparency. It's like a piece of mylar that you can't touch in a way. That's how I see projected films. And for me, the wood sticks, they're a little heavy-handed. I feel like I want something a little bit more delicate. So this could be one that maybe you just explore other materials. What do you think, Lauryn?
Well, so I'm less focused on the sticks. Maybe you're right, but what I would love to have seen is your body in there in this documentation, partly because of this whole transparency thing, the ephemerality of this land, of both being able to lay claim on it in some way, to be present, but also knowing that that presence is transitory and you can't actually stay there forever, that it will have multiple uses over time. I think having your body up against that projection would be, one, more work better towards that idea, and two, also connect back towards that previous image that you had of that photo of you in that space that we couldn't tell where it was, the one film piece. So yeah, that's where I'm at.
All right, let's look at some process pieces. Can you tell us what we're looking at here?
Yeah, so this is a process piece actually relating to the drawing, the wall, the one with many paper hanging from the wall.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember that? The one
Yeah,
where
yeah.
it clashed
Yep.
two planes. So this is actually the end product of it. And then to be very extremely specific, you see that one piece of line that looks like a rectangle. That
Yep.
was actually brought to visualization, and that talks about again the object right there. Yeah, right there. Talks about the object being a part of the space, just not touching the wall, not touching the ground, but just exists, and how we, the body, move around that without any awareness or whatever the human experience is.
Well, I can't see these up close, obviously, but I suspect that this is really impeccable craftsmanship. And I think that goes a really long way. This is one of those things. It's like if you try to make something like this and you don't do an amazing job, it looks terrible. And so this is where your architectural studies have clearly helped you out a lot. I've watched people at art school try to make something like this and think, oh, it's not a big deal. It's just some wood. I'll throw it. And I'm like, nah, it's actually sort of hard to make. And so you have the skill set to make that happen. I'm very intrigued by this piece because I guess I keep thinking if I was in this gallery, would I try to walk through it? Would I walk under? Like I can't tell if it's too high to be a door, but it's too low to be like it's such a strange shape. What do you think, Lauryn?
I don't know, Clara. This piece is actually the toughest one for me, or the one that I have the most baggage trying to understand, maybe. And I think this is because I'm coming from a painting perspective where we have empty frames that were shown throughout the 80s and postmodernism and shown as a kind of, hey, this is, how do you interact with this? Is this also painting? Is this also artwork? Which I know is not the point of this, but the way that these kinds of pieces, and there were many freestanding pieces, occupy the space is very similar. So the idea is that you're going through it, you're going around it, like how does this live in a gallery? How does it live in a space? Are in some ways played out to me. But at the same time, I realize that there is stuff there. I think when I'm looking at this, I think of when you put a ladder out and nobody wants to walk under the ladder because that's bad luck. And this feels very much the same, where who's going to be that person that's going to actually walk through this? Because you can walk through it if you want to, but that we have, I think that there's some examination of social faux pas or traditions or things that keep us from using a piece in a certain way or walking around a piece in a certain way.
All right, so let's look at this next project. And actually, this slide is a mock-up that you created in cardboard. And then this is the final installation. Is this on the campus at your school, Chummeng?
It is. Yep, it is.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And we do actually have a process photo here so you guys can see all the work that comes into this. I'm curious, what is the material? Is it made out of wood or something else?
It is. It was plywood. That was it. And I didn't fully brought this into visualization. Originally, it was metallic, and I didn't have the time in school to bring it to metallic, so I left it raw.
Mm-hmm.
Right, like that.
And then was this an assignment or was this an independent project?
This was actually an assignment, a school assignment.
Now, in an ideal world, then would you want it to be metal or would you want it to be a chromified painted wood? Is there a difference to you?
In the past, yes, but now, no. I want to add color to this. And that's the biggest regret before I took this piece down.
Well, I think that it's tricky because so much of this is reliant on the site. Did you pick this particular spot on campus for a reason, or did you have to
Yes,
use this spot? Okay, so why
100%.
this area?
So this is the most beautiful building. It's actually in the shape of piano, and no one knows that. So I wanted to bring focus and traffic into this location. A part of that is the metallic pieces to bring the eye, the focus. But it didn't happen. The engagement wasn't there because I think it was lacking some form of metallicness or attention. But what's interesting is the reflection on the opposite building. But other than that, that was it.
Okay, so you hit a point there about what you want, what your intentions were for the piece, what you wanted it to do, and you wanted it to bring attention to this particular area and the things that you found beautiful about it. And yet you installed something that you wanted to draw attention to itself and its metallicness rather than the building. So I guess I'm wondering why you chose something that is so object-based to make and not something that is maybe more accommodating for people to be there, if that makes sense. Such as a structure that would ask for gathering, like say a bench or a table or something that could weave itself into the location, but still maybe be sculptural.
I wanted to, the original idea was to be able to bring focus into that object and respond to that object is the topographic view of the location. So there's a relationship there. Originally, I actually sat inside the space and it becomes almost a sound trap. It traps the vibration of the human sound, which responds to the music building, and I discovered that after. But I agree. I wonder why as well. Why not a communal bench or a communal space?
I was thinking about that if sitting in there created a certain echo effect because it does have that hollow area. I'm glad you thought of that.
Yeah.
Well, I guess one of the reasons I asked you about this particular place and the building and everything is I do think that in the most basic way, when you make an outdoor sculpture, sometimes it's about, whoa, this sculpture does not fit here. Look at how strange and bizarre it looks in this landscape. And other times it's, wow, this sculpture feels like it's part of this landscape. It's funny, when I was at RISD, they were building the mall in the 90s. And I remember after they built it, I was like, wow, they really got that mall to fit the landscape. Like it really looked like it was there the whole time. And so I think I would just ask yourself, do you want your sculpture to almost feel like this alien invasion of the landscape? Or is it a native to that place? Right now, I feel like the sculpture is a little random. Like I can't really figure out which one it's supposed to be. I suspect that part of that was the shift of material. If it was a glossy object that was shiny, I think we would be looking at it in a very different way. All right, there's a lot to unpack with this piece. So can you explain what's going on here? We got a couple slides to show this piece.
So this was my practical piece. So you had to really abide by the national park. This is a collaboration with the national park, Parking Day. Building this installation was abide by the parking lot, street parking, of course, 5 feet by, I think this was 20 feet. And this piece really is a commission to reflect the community as a form of healing, and healing through body movements such as yoga, healing through writing, and then healing through describing the environment they're in. And a part of describing that environment, the fabric, right, becomes integrated to help visualize where they're at, despite the traffic on their left side or right side, and then the sidewalk on the left or right side. the audience were able to move. They were able to participate. They were able to contribute to this idea of healing and what it means.
And so you actually installed this for real.
Yep.
Where was this done?
This was in Lowell, Massachusetts, in collaboration with the National Park. They commissioned this piece.
I mean, that's phenomenal that you have done. This is a huge amount of work, you guys, to do a commission that involves the community and an outdoor setting. It's not a small feat. So, Lauryn, what's your take?
Yeah, I think it's really ambitious at your point in your career to be working not only in installation, but in the wide open, in the sense that there are, as Clara kind of said, there are so many aspects that you have to be aware of that can happen at any time. You being by the street, by the parking lot, having to deal with noise, with different portions of the public. Obviously, there are different constituencies that live in Lowell, so you want to be aware of who are the people that are living there and what do they feel in the construction of this piece and the use of this piece, and what people are you bringing in from out of the area that are coming in to use this piece. And so there are just a whole lot of both physical and social navigations that you have to work through in order to do this.
We have a comment from Moonbeam who says, I wish the drapes in the actual piece reached as far down as on the sketch. I think it would help with that feeling of seclusion. So was that a change you made in the project? Because in this slide, the drapes are really long. They look like they're falling on the floor. But here it seems like they're not as long and they're also a little bit more torn up. So was that a change in the design?
No, actually, what happened was it was so windy that day, and the piece became start falling apart.
Oh, okay.
The fabric that the national park produced. So this was actually the fabric that the local national park produced that we end up using. And of course, I have a whole. I have to have a whole team to help me put this installation to life. And a part of putting that installation to life, we learned that we have to battle the natural environment. It was hard. A battle. Yeah. Lisa is asking, how long was it in place? It was in place for 1 day, 1 month of time.
This is why I'm not a sculptor, you guys, much less a site-specific one. It is a crazy amount of work, but it seems like you were very well prepared as far as thinking it through as an idea. I guess my critique of this piece would be that here you say mindfulness walk, yoga and meditation space, and reflection tables. In my opinion, you could just pick one of those. I don't think you need to have all three. I mean, it could be maybe this is a series of pieces, and sometimes it's a mindfulness walk, sometimes it's reflection tables. I just sort of feel like you're trying to push too many ideas into what is a very elegant, beautiful design. But I feel right now it's a little bit busy as far as what you're trying to communicate. And a great artist to look at would be Anne Hamilton, because she does these interactive pieces. This is actually one where you get on a swing and it actually affects the fabric and everything. But I was just thinking visually, she would be a really good person for you to look at, because she's a similar aesthetic with the black and white, the minimal quality. And then Toba Kadori, I think, would be excellent. She primarily does drawings that are very large scale, but they feel very architectural. I don't know. What do you think, Lauryn?
Going back to the installation itself, I do want to say that, kind of going off of your point, Clara, that I think it would be worth investigating what kinds of things beyond the surface of yoga and meditation trigger certain different communities to be within that space of mindfulness, because I think that like yoga in particular, like I can see it like with the mats, how you do it, but that's like I think it's like a thing that has come over here and has like this westernized colonization aspect to it that sometimes can overshadow like the actual like needs and meanings of it. I think things like not that you have to use this, but foods are one thing, or like things within the actual landscape itself could be like another thing. Different. Yeah, just like exploring what meditation means to multiple types of people would be helpful if you were to establish this further and for your overall practice.
Mhm.
I mean, I don't know anything about Cambodian dance, but I wonder if that's something you can bring in to an installation like that in the future, because that is something you have personal experience with. And I know that sometimes when you try to pack so many ideas into a single project, you end up skimming the surface and not going very deep with it. And I think that that has a lot of potential for what you could do. We have an art prof share today, which is where one of you creates an artwork in response to one or more of our videos. In this case, this artist, and I'm so sorry if I mispronounced her name, Marijke, sorry, I can't say it. It's in the video description. Dave Belder actually created this oil painting, which is titled The Woman Who Understood Too Much, was actually inspired by not just one art prof video, but 3. This is brilliant, you guys. Such an ambitious oil painting. So this is a painting, as you can see, it's of a falling woman. And so they watched Alex's gouache painting, where we talk a lot about taking reference photos, and they mention it was always pretty straightforward. If I want to draw a cat, I just photograph a cat. But the problem is I wanted to paint a falling woman. So in this video called Is This Artwork from a Photo Reference, we did talk about these Maxfield Parrish paintings where he had his artist models doing these ridiculous poses. And so that made, I'm sorry, I can't say her name, Marijke, I can't say it. Think about taking silly photos of themselves for their painting. And then finally, there's this video, which is how to shoot a reference photo, where Lauryn actually talks about reenacting scenes and setups in order to get the right photo. So you guys can see that if we look at the reference photos that were shot for this painting, I mean, they were just so thorough. They even made videos of cloth that they threw up in the air to watch it falling. And they say, honestly, you cannot imagine how often I have thrown with things in my apartment just to see them falling. And because of the lockdown, I had to paint myself. Did not necessarily want to make a self-portrait, but I did with what I had. And so this is what ended up being shot for these reference photos, including this little piece of the foot, the background, the works. So Lauryn, how did they do with this piece in our videos?
Well, honestly, Clara, this piece makes me feel embarrassed for myself because I do not put this much effort into getting all the different reference photos. This is clearly like way blows anything out of the water, and I can pick out each thing in your painting that is using each different reference, which I love, and I think it works really well. Like usually in a situation like this, you get really weird anatomy or hair that didn't actually look like it was falling, but everything about that, even down to the verticality of the strokes, the marks on the paper canvas, is really believable. I'm quite impressed.
I love the cloth, Lauryn. That blue cloth, the way it's going upwards and then the figure is going down. You would not be able to make that up out of your head and have it be that convincing. And I just am picturing somebody throwing pieces of fence, like these ridiculous things we do to create our work. And good for you, because this is a really ambitious piece. This is just so many hours of work and research, but it's like it really paid off.
It's huge too. It's body sized.
I know. And so it's amazing because you guys, we're seeing more and more as we're doing these art prof shares that people are not using the videos in such a straightforward step-by-step manner, that rather they're picking and pulling from multiple videos, getting different techniques and ideas, and then integrating them into their own work. So exciting. I mean, guys, my art teacher heart is just bursting with pride right now. This is just the coolest thing ever. So if you guys would like to submit for an Art Prof share, just go to artprof.org and you want to click on tutorials. There is a purple button to tap on, and you will see there's an Art Prof share submission form where you guys can send us your stuff, or you can also tag us on Instagram and use hashtag #ArtProfShare, because we love showing what the community is creating right now. Art Prof has a podcast. It's available on Spotify and also on iTunes. And in a little bit, Lauryn and I will be hanging out in the Art Prof Discord. We will be in the post live streams channel, so come chat with us. Subscribe to our channel and join the Art Prof family. And thank you so much to our top Patreon supporters. You guys are the ones who make it possible for us to keep Art Prof 100% free and accessible to everybody. And thank you to everybody who watched for your wonderful comments about Chummeng's work. And Chummeng, thank you so much for joining us. It was such a pleasure to see your work, and we're so excited to see where you go with it in the future. So
Yay.
everybody,